Welcome to this explainer. We're diving right into a foundational question about how we build truly decentralized systems. Today, we're decoding the revolutionary architecture of the OMI Protocol, and we're zeroing in on a core invariant, one that completely separates true deterministic computing from the kind of fragile systems we rely on every single day. We are talking about place value versus sign value.
Okay, so let's start with what seems like a totally basic question. What is the true identity of digital data? I know, it sounds simple, but it actually exposes a massive, fundamental flaw in modern computer science when it comes to deterministic computation. For decades, we've basically been taught to look at digital identity through a very specific, narrow lens. We just assume that a cryptographic hash or some randomly generated ID represents the absolute truth of a piece of data. But OMI steps in and asks us to look a little closer and realize that we might have been confusing the map for the actual territory.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the flaw of digital identity. Second, sign value and the hash surrogate. Third, place value or identity as structure. Fourth, the deterministic OMI pipeline. And finally, number 5, why place value literally changes everything. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The flaw of digital identity.
Now, to really grasp what OMI is doing, we first have to completely unlearn this deeply ingrained assumption that a cryptographic hash is an actual identity. Think about it. We are so incredibly used to just throwing a block of JSON into a function and calling that random string of characters the identity of that data. Well, that is a signed value model. It collapses your rich, beautifully structured data into a fixed surrogate label. It's exactly like a code check ticket. The ticket tells you absolutely nothing about the physical code itself, right? If you lose the code, well, the ticket is totally useless. A hash actually points away from the data. It creates a catastrophic blind spot because you literally cannot reconstruct the original structural relationship from just a hash alone.
So here is the massive paradigm shift. Place value identity. What this means is that the exact mathematical coordinates and the inherent structure of your data actually serve as the address itself. There's no surrogate ticket required, no code check. In OMI, the data relation acts as its own physical coordinate map. You don't need a hash to look it up because its own internal geometry dictates exactly where it lives in the system.
Moving to Part 2, sign value, the hash surrogate.
You see, relying on these sign value surrogates completely breaks the fundamental rules of decentralized state synchronization. Why? Well, because the moment you use a hash, you're relying on an external mapping system to hold the truth. And boom, you've just introduced a centralized point of failure. Hashes point away from the relation, which breaks down mathematical composition. You can't just easily compose two hashes together to understand the relationship between their underlying datasets, right? But the OMI way, place value, natively preserves that complete structural relation. You can mathematically trace it, reverse it, and carry it forward, all without ever needing a centralized lookup table.
All right, Part 3, place value, identity as structure.
The crucial takeaway here is that in the OMI ecosystem, the structure is the identity and the relation is the address. Period. Instead of destroying data by collapsing it into a hash, OMI uses what's called a cascade of addressability. Basically, every wider envelope perfectly preserves and carries forward the root relation. Think of it kind of like Russian nesting dolls, which OMI formally refers to as a right-nested continuation. The frame, the route, the witness, and the closure, these aren't just arbitrary strings that need a cryptographic digest to become stable. They are the exact mathematical coordinates. Each envelope expands, but you can always deterministically trace it right back to the root.
And this exact structural incidence creates an unchangeable ring of exactly 5,040 finite geometric slots. Picture a massive, flawless mathematical Sudoku board. This is actually derived from finite Fano-plane geometry, 7 lines, 3 points per line. The point is, your data isn't just randomly dropped wherever a database happens to have some free space. Its very mathematical nature locks it into one and only one of these 5,040 specific slots. And OMI is incredibly strict about this. The canonical doctrine states that introducing a hash into the protocol core creates a fundamental category error. It completely shatters deterministic carry forward. Now, to be perfectly clear here, OMI does allow hashing at the external carrier layer. Like, say you're transporting data over the public internet and you want to encrypt it or compress it. That's fine. But the very second that data crosses into the protocol core, the hash has to go. It must be stripped away, and pure place value identity takes over.
Which brings us to Part 4, the deterministic OMI pipeline.
Once you get rid of hashes and rely purely on structural math, you absolutely need a rigid pipeline to enforce the rules. OMI strictly divides power among 4 specific authorities. Think of it like a perfectly unbending assembly line. First, OMI parses the citation. Then, the tetragrammatron acts as the sole deterministic validator. Next, Metatron projects that validated state so we can actually interface with it. And finally, IMO simply acts as the carrier between boundaries. Notice something? Absolutely none of them use hashes for core identity. No single authority combines roles. It is a perfect, hash-free separation of powers.
Every single piece of data has to survive this mandatory sequential pipeline. This means a citation does not equal acceptance, and literally nothing becomes real until a receipt is permanently recorded. You can't just skip steps. You absolutely cannot project something to the user that hasn't been strictly validated by the tetragrammatron and recorded into one of those 5040 ring slots. This pipeline isn't a suggestion, it's the unbendable law of the protocol.
And this rigid pipeline enforces lazy evaluation all the way down to physical hardware. It guarantees that, say, a robotic arm or a smart door lock is never going to actuate before an immutable receipt is verified. An incoming command is merely an intent, just a candidate. The hardware literally will not power the relay until that intent has passed through full validation and a permanent receipt has been written to the ring. This prevents a massive category of dangerous, premature side effects.
There's a powerful mantra in this space that perfectly summarizes this entire operational flow. Code is data, file is port, notation is citation, canon validates, cosmology projects, receipt accepts. It's almost like executable poetry, right? It ensures every participant knows exactly where authority truly lies. Canon validates, meaning the math holds the absolute truth. Receipt accepts, meaning the immutable record on the ring is the final word.
Okay, part 5. Why place value changes everything.
So you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble to abandon the hash-based architectures we're so used to? Because place value mathematically guarantees that the exact same structural input will always, without fail, yield the exact same output. And because of this perfect deterministic replay, multiple peers can achieve perfectly synchronized worlds relying solely on local validation. You don't need some heavy, energy-draining blockchain consensus mechanism. If I hand you a valid place value relation, you can independently run it through your own local tetragrammatron, and it will undeniably resolve to the exact same state every single time.
When a data relation acts as its own physical coordinate map, you completely eliminate the need for centralized databases, proof-of-work hash mining, or blind consensus protocols. It just frees the data to exist independently. The structure itself is the proof. And this is exactly what unlocks true, scalable, decentralized accountability.
So if you are building decentralized systems, this single architectural shift leaves you with a really vital question about your own work. Take a hard look at your network. Does it rely on structural, mathematical truth? Or are you just holding on to a fragile surrogate ticket? At the end of the day, are you storing the coat or just the coat check receipt?